Great. So good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. Thank you so much for joining us all today. My name is Lauren Gherkin. I'm the INEE Gender Coordinator, and I will be one of your facilitators today with Esther. Um, Before we get started, we have a little icebreaker for you. So if you wouldn't mind updating your Zoom name so we can see who you are, you can do that by hovering over your picture and clicking the three little dots and clicking rename. And then if you wouldn't mind letting us know how you're doing in the chat using only emojis. Be creative. Um, this this is roughly how I'm doing today. And apologies for the coughing. Um, we're all sick. Okay. So Esther mentioned this earlier, but just to reiterate, our goal for today is to introduce some of INEE's available PSS-SEL resources, like the toolbox and the teacher wellbeing guidance note. And we're going to do a little refresher on PSS and SEL terminology and concepts as well. And that's what I'm going to start off doing today. Seeing lots of smiley faces in the chat. This is really lovely. Um, oh, and apparently it's very hot somewhere. Um, all right, so let's get started into the basics of PSS and SEL. So our foundational documents are the INEE guidance note on psychosocial support and the INEE background paper on psychosocial support and social and emotional learning for children and youth in emergency settings. Can I get you guys to raise your hand, either your real physical hand on camera or your virtual hand on Zoom, if you've ever used any of these resources before? Not seeing any hands. Oh, a couple of hands. That's awesome. All right. Well, for folks who might not be so familiar, the guidance note on psychosocial support clarifies the importance of supporting the psychosocial well-being of children and youth, and it offers some specific strategies for how to incorporate PSS into education responses. And then the background paper clarifies relevant terminologies and approaches relating to PSS and SEL and explores how they relate to one another. If you haven't used those resources before, you can find the links to them in the chat. I hope you're able to check those out today. So we're going to talk quite a bit about PSS and SEL today, but before we do that, we're going to talk about what it means to be well. I'm going to put the link in the chat to a Jamboard for you. If you guys could all open that Jamboard, we're going to do a quick activity together. All right. Wow, already seeing lots of folks in the Jamboard. That's awesome. All right. So we're going to have about 3 minutes in a group, and we're going to think of some examples of what we need to feel well, to feel happy, to feel content, to feel comfortable. You're going to think of some things, some abilities, some beliefs, and some feelings that you need to feel well. And feel free to use your personal and your professional experiences. When you have an example, you're going to add a little sticky note to the Jamboard. You can do that by clicking on this icon here, typing out your answer, clicking save and cancel. And then you can drag that to the section that you think it belongs in. Right, you guys are going to have 3 minutes. Think of as many examples as you can. Wow, seeing some really good examples here. 1 minute remaining. Keep those examples coming.
Lauren,
Yep.
for those not able to access the Jamboard, can they type in the chat?
Yep, totally fine. If you're not able to access the Jamboard, type in the chat and then we'll copy those examples over for you.
Thank you.
All right, 30 seconds left. Get your last ideas out. All right. Some really great examples I'm seeing here of some serious like diversity of examples. As you can see by some of the examples we've got here, there are physical, social, emotional aspects of well-being. In order to feel well, you need to have your physical and biological needs met, like food and water, shelter, medical services. You also need to have your social and emotional needs met, like feeling safe, having positive relationships with your family and community, being able to practice your religious and cultural traditions. And in emergency situations, people's biological and material needs are often the most visible, but their social, emotional, mental, cultural, and spiritual needs, they can sometimes be more difficult to identify, but they're still incredibly important to address. Can we think about why it might be important to understand what makes a person feel well? Why do you think it's important to understand that we need all of these things in order to feel well? Feel free to type your answer in the chat or unmute yourself. Um, why do you think it's important to understand what makes a person feel well? Don't be shy. Yeah, that's a great answer, Sarah. We need to know what our resources so we can access them when we're in need. Why else, folks? Anybody else? To understand ourselves. Yep, that's a great answer. Um, yeah, so pretty much if we're going to be planning and providing effective support, we need to understand well-being and the factors that influence it, right? So we need to know what people's needs are in order to support them. Um, yeah, and to make sure that we're building inclusive systems because different people's needs might be different. That's a really important point. Um, all right, so looking back at this Jamboard again, how do you think humanitarian crises affect well-being? Which of these factors do you think might be threatened during emergencies? So if you think a factor might be threatened during an emergency, we're gonna take it and we're gonna move it to the center. We're gonna cover up our little dude here. So 1 minute, if you think something is threatened during an emergency, take it and drag it to the center. Yep, seeing a lot of movement. Amazing. Yeah, a lot of these factors that affect well-being are going to be threatened during a humanitarian crisis. Um, I'm going to go back to the slides now, but keep the Jamboard open. We're going to come back to it later. All right. So, um, humanitarian crises are on the rise around the globe, especially with the growing threat of climate change. There are different kinds of crises, environmental disasters like hurricanes, earthquakes, tsunamis, droughts, cyclones, epidemics, floods, and landslides often destroy infrastructure and they create direct threats to life. Man-made disasters or human-made disasters can also be caused by conflict and violence. They often lead to prolonged conflict, which may not necessarily cause acute threats to life, but it may cause ongoing tension and persistent fear. And both environmental and human-made disasters disrupt every aspect of daily living, including housing, health, sanitation, recreation, and education. They disrupt family relationships and social cohesion, and then they can create feelings of uncertainty, fear, anger, and loss. And children are often the most vulnerable in crises. Even if they survive a crisis, their psychosocial well-being may still be at serious risk. So, what is psychosocial well-being? It is influenced by psychological strengths and positive social experiences. Psychological strengths include practices, beliefs, and rituals that give life meaning. These are activities that make us feel safe and secure and improve our mental health. Positive social experiences, such as our relationships with supportive family and community members, can create a sense of belonging. And families and communities play an essential role in supporting psychosocial well-being. So now that we've talked a bit about well-being, let's talk about psychosocial support. So this is the process and actions that promote holistic well-being of a person in their social world. Psychosocial support can facilitate resilience within individuals, families, and communities. And for children in particular, there are several needs that need to be met in order to ensure their psychosocial well-being through psychosocial support interventions. And these are a sense of belonging, intellectual stimulation, physical stimulation, personal attachments, feeling valued, and relationships with peers. Can you guys think of any ways that we might support those ideas? So choose one of these processes or one of these actions and think of one way that we can support those needs. And again, you can either respond in the chat or feel free to raise your hand or unmute yourself and share an example. So what are some ways that we can support these needs on this slide? Safe access to education. Yep, that's a great example. Sports and exercise, providing education. Yep. Yeah, one more example, and then we can move on. Yeah, social and emotional learning, community groups. Amazing. Yeah, you guys have some great examples here. So let's look at some more. Um, so some examples of interventions for psychosocial support. So creating inclusive, affirming education spaces with familiar routines and cultural or traditional childcare practices can help support a sense of belonging. Group and team activities like sports and drama, where children need to work together, can help foster healthy relationships with peers. Um, Making sure teachers understand how to form appropriate caring relationships with children can help them form secure attachments. Providing a variety of educational experiences that appeal to different types of learners can be intellectually stimulating. Recreational activities like games, sports, music, and dance can get kids up and moving and physically active. And then creating opportunities for children to express themselves, take pride in their work, and receive praise can help them feel valued. Psychosocial support interventions promote well-being. They can be preventative, meaning they decrease the risk that a child will develop mental health issues, or they can be curative, meaning that they can help children cope with or overcome psychosocial issues. And then an important component of psychosocial support is social and emotional learning. PSS programs usually pave the way for social and emotional learning, or SEL. And SEL refers to the processes and actions that foster self-awareness, emotional literacy, resilience, and self-confidence. They are essential for well-being and learning at school. And they are designed and implemented in learning spaces and are ideally an integral component of a school curriculum. Through social and emotional learning, children and youth acquire the competencies that they need to recognize and manage their emotions. It can also help them make responsible decisions, establish positive relationships, and handle interpersonal challenges constructively. So we're going to go back to the chat and back to y'all. Why do you think each of these competencies is important? How does it benefit children to have these competencies? And if you have any examples, how do you think you can build or strengthen them? So why is it important? How can you build and strengthen them? Again, feel free to unmute yourself and chat, or you can type your responses in the chat. Yep, they support the use of other skills and abilities that they have. Great. What else, folks? Why might they be important? And how can we support these skills? Yep, they enable learning. Awesome. One more. Huge thanks to the Sarahs, by the way. You've got some great examples. Um, Building resilience, being emotionally and intellectually and academically better, having fulfilling relationships. These are all really great examples, guys. Better mental health, living in a society with others. That's a really important point. Great examples, guys. Connecting with parents, connecting with their peers, connecting with themselves, maybe. Excellent. All right, so now that we're familiar with some of the key terms in PSS and SEL, we're going to look at some strategies. So as you can see on the pyramid here, there are 4 levels of PSS and SEL interventions: basic services and security, community and family support, focused and non-specialized support, and specialized services. So the basic services and security level presents education as an essential service to create routine and normality following an emergency. Some examples of this level are opening schools, opening youth and child-friendly non-formal education spaces, and training teachers. The community and family support level presents schools as a bridge between family and community support systems. Some examples of this level are parent-teacher associations and school councils. The focused non-specialized level recognizes that some learners may need more support than others, and that could look like group counseling or peer-to-peer support in schools. And then finally, the specialized services level recognizes that the most vulnerable learners may need additional support outside of the school environment, and that might look like referral to mental health practitioners. So we're going to go back to the Jamboard, and I will post that link in the chat again for folks who may not have seen it. And we're going to go to page 2, and you can navigate between the Jamboards using these arrows at the top. So we have the intervention period, and we have some examples of different interventions. You guys are going to have 3 minutes as a group working together to drag and drop the examples to the level that you think that they fit. Perfect. So hiring community members as teaching assistants goes to community and family supports. Ready? Go. Collaborating. Very nice. All right, guys, that was very quick. I'm very impressed. Um, if you would like to check out the answers to this activity, they are on page 3. Um, but for now, I'm going to hand back to Esther. I think it's time for a break. Do we want to do questions first or move straight into the break?
If anyone has a question, they could ask so that we don't pile up any questions. Anyone who needs any clarification or have a question or to build up on what we've done so far, please feel free to do so now.
And
Are
you
we?
can type your questions in the chat at any point as well as we're going on.
Yeah.
Um, Maybe for the sake of time, let's do a break now. And if you guys have any questions, type them in the chat. How do you become a regular participant? Um, I would recommend subscribing to the biweekly bulletin, which is our biweekly newsletter. Anytime we have new workshops or new events that are happening, they'll be featured there, so you can be the first to know. And you can do that by logging into your INEE account and then selecting BWB from the list of listservs. Alrighty, if there aren't any questions, you're very welcome. If there aren't any more questions for now, we're going to take a 5-minute break. For your own well-being, please take this time to get up and step away from your computer, stretch, make yourself some tea. Do not use this time to check your email. Give yourself a real break. Um, and we will see you back in 5 minutes. Thanks so much, everybody.
Thank you, Lauren. Welcome back. Thank you, Lauren, for introducing us and giving us some foundational knowledge on PSS and SEL. I think those are the fundamentals, regardless of where we come from or where we are working, that we need to be very cognizant of what psychosocial support involves, which is the psycho and the social. And then in terms of social emotional learning, what are the 5 key things we need to look at when we are recognizing that we need to have some social emotional learning activities or some a program to just look at the fundamentals. So now I want us to look at the PSS-SEL toolbox. Allow me to post the link on the chat. We shall be able to visit it shortly. For now, I'd like us to just be able to get some foundational knowledge on the PSS-SEL toolbox. And as you notice, even with the slides have changed slightly. You notice there are 2 logos that are on the slides moving forward in this segment. And the PSS-SEL toolbox is a co-creation of between INEE and ISLab, which is under the Harvard University. So for this segment, I'll be doing the reflective bit of the presentation, and then we will have Brian come in to be able to take us through an experiential journey of what and how the toolbox looks like. So before we even get into the toolbox, I just want to look at what have been the current challenges in the field of psychosocial support and social emotional learning. Number 1, it has been difficult to understand evidence tied to specific PSS-SEL skills, to communicate this effectively across organizations or partners, and to even design programs and align measurement strategies to the specific skills or outcomes of interest. Number 2, another challenge we've had a lack of transparency and coherence as a negative effect on the ability to promote, measure, and track progress of PSS-SEL efforts, which undermines the influence as a whole. And then thirdly, we have the culture and the context influence of social and emotional development and well-being. Yet the majority of the research that we currently have on SEL also comes from the US and other Western and stable contexts, and this reflects dominant white, Western, and cultural norms. So having looked at this, we have come to understand that there are very many different names, very many different definitions, and measurement strategies when it comes to this field of PSS-SEL. And so because of this challenge, onto the next slide, as INEE and as ISLab, we came up with a response, which is the PSS-SEL toolbox. And this one is designed for stakeholders working on psychosocial support and social emotional learning in global settings, with a focus on education in emergencies, as well as spaces where humanitarian response is required in protracted crisis. So we shall be looking at what is the toolbox, able to introduce you to it, but look at it more in terms of localizing it, because we're saying it's a global resource, it's a world-class tool. However, it can only be effective if you use it in a localized manner. So please note the toolbox has 3 major tools, and Brian will be able to take us through these. We have the data tools, we have the localizing tools, as well as the resources. So having introduced that, I want us to look at something else that is also happening in as much as we've responded in terms of the toolbox. And in the next slide, I want to introduce us also to what we are calling a collective action or a collaborative that is bringing different resources together to continue to enhance and to grow the work of PSS-SEL. So in one angle, we have the PSS-SEL toolbox that was designed by Harvard, ISLab, and INEE. On another angle, we have the measurement library that is still under INEE, but we also have the social emotional learning and the soft skills measurement task force that is under USAID and UNICEF. And all these 3 major partners have come together for collective action and to say we need to work together and be able to sensitize everyone and every stakeholder in this space to understand that the tools interplay and support each other in one way or another. For today, we'll be talking about the toolbox, but keep it locked for more in terms of workshops or sensitizations when it comes to the measurement task force, as well as the measurement library. And if you have any question about any of these three collaboratives, please feel free to reach out and I'll be able to support you with that. Now, what made us come up with the toolbox? As we look at why, I want us to look at who was involved in terms of creating the toolbox. And in the next slide, we're going to look at who were the stakeholders involved when it came to creating the toolbox. We had a reference group that had 24 members from 18 countries, from 23 organizations working in the EIE settings. And even right now, conversations are still ongoing with people beyond this membership and beyond the 18 countries to continue to enhance the toolbox. We also had a think tank of over 70 participants from 29 countries, from 60 organizations, from a number of partner organizations, universities, from the Ministry of Education, and we also had 13 countries in the field testing with anchor organizations, including university partners, MOE, local and international NGOs and consultants, and all this happened between May to December of 2021 before the toolbox was officially launched. So please note, we did try to bring in as many partners as possible to be able to start and kick off the toolbox and be able to say, can we start bringing different resources together? So why did we create the toolbox? And its aim is to build on the evidence of PSS-SEL while recognizing that evidence is largely based on stable contexts and should be localized for relevance, for meaning, and to fit in the EIE space. So please note, we have two major tools, the data tools that show current approaches in terms of frameworks and terms, but we also have the localizing tools to ensure relevance, meaning, and that it fits for the EIE settings. Before we proceed with the toolbox and get into the toolbox, I have a fun exercise for us. Let's go to the next slide. Next, please. As we get inside, before we even get into the exercise, allow me to emphasize at this point that localizing tools have been translated and we are currently working to design them so that they can be uploaded in the different INEE languages other than English, which is Arabic, French, Portuguese, and Spanish. Please sign up for our newsletter and we'll be able to spread the word once we have uploaded the localizing tools in the other different INEE languages. The data tools will be the next phase that we shall be working on, but all the other linked INEE resources in the resources section are available in all INEE languages. So please note, as many resources as possible are being translated and being provided in the different languages to allow us to be able to localize the toolbox as much as is possible. As we get into a reflective part of this workshop, I want to ask you, where are you joining us from today? Please let us know the city and the country you've joined the workshop from. And that is in the next slide. I am from Nairobi, Kenya. Allow me to start it off. I am in Nairobi, so it is currently 4 o'clock on this side. Where are you from? I see Washington, I see Glasgow from Scotland. I see Chisinau, I see Amman, I see Addis, I see Istanbul, I see Damascus, Syria, I see Mozambique, I see Switzerland. Where are you joining us from? I see Abuja, Sudan, Washington, DC. Thank you. I see we're on very different time zones. Sudan as well. Afghanistan. Thank you. Toronto, Canada. Thank you for joining. Pakistan. Sudan, South Darfur. Anybody else who'd like to tell us where they're joining us from? Thank you, Samira. You're most welcome. And the interesting fun fact is I have a cold. I'm in Nairobi, and Lauren is miles away and she has a cold. I don't know how that happened, and we're not in contact, but very interesting. So step 2, what is unique about where you live? Tell us one interesting fun fact about where you live. It could be a fun fact or an interesting fact. Amman is super dry. Okay, interesting. It's cold and rainy in summer. Thank you, Fiona. I think in Nairobi, we only have two weather patterns, the hot season or the cold season where it's raining. So we don't have the 4 seasons because we're at the equator. Here in Texas, we pride ourselves in our barbecue meats. I will definitely sample some meat when I come to Texas eventually. What's a fun fact about where you live? It's Eid Day. Thank you, Samira, for joining. And it's Eid. We had our Eid yesterday, and today we've resumed normal working operations. Thank you. In Glasgow, people are super friendly. Okay. In Nairobi, we're a mix of that. Any other interesting fun facts? Istanbul spans 2 continents, Europe and Asia. And it is very hot in Sudan, but it rains sometime. Okay. When it rains here, it's very cold. So you can see we have more or less, unique facts, but they could present themselves in very different manners depending on where we live. And so I want us to look at the toolbox as a global tool, but now as we reflect on the questions to look at when it comes to localizing, look at it in terms of your context. Even as I get into localizing the toolbox, and as I was preparing today, I was reminded that there's so many global brands that when you look at them in different contexts, their marketing is totally different. And the first brand that came to the top of my mind, not a very healthy choice, but when you think about Coke, the soda, Coca-Cola, it's like a global brand. But when you come to Nairobi, the marketing is so much different than when you go to Amman or you go to the States or you go to Canada. And so we have this toolbox that we want you to be able to use effectively and efficiently in your local context. So let us go to the next slide and look at the toolbox now with that in mind. And when we look at the localizing tools, what they do is they help you identify local needs, they help you learn about skills, they help you use data effectively, they help you prioritize and then validate for your local context. Please note if you have any questions, please type them in the chat box as we keep reflecting and even having an experiential tour of the toolbox. We will be able to respond to your questions about the toolbox. The localizing process and contextualizing guidance is in the localizing tools, and these are designed to help stakeholders use the data to inform PSS-SEL work in their local context. Let me ask at this point, who are the different stakeholders in the PSS-SEL work? Kindly type for me who you feel is a stakeholder when it comes to this very important, crucial work we do, especially in the EIE space and humanitarian context. Students, teachers, school leaders, parents, NGOs, who else? Okay, someone says, I think Sarah got them all. Okay. Parents, especially, are an important one, yes. IDPs. Did you mean internally displaced persons, Fiona? That's what IDPs means here in Nairobi. Okay, thank you. At least we're in common understanding. Community members. Who else is a stakeholders? Local authorities, government or otherwise, and refugees. Please note the toolbox caters for each and every different stakeholders, including even donors, when it comes to the work and crucial elements of PSS-SEL. Next slide, please. So as we are talking about the toolbox, please consider all these different stakeholders. Consider your local context as we are looking at what can localizing tools help you do. Please note they are flexible. These tools, you can use them standalone or sequenced, and you can include guides for your setting. So localizing tools explore local needs, gather local input, highlight and prioritize local perspectives, and use data and resources. When I was thinking about this part of the toolbox, especially exploring local needs, I remembered a global brand that came into Kenya a few years back, and they didn't take the time to explore the local needs. We all wanted this global brand in Kenya, especially Nairobi, but because they didn't explore the local needs, they didn't gather local input before they were able to just get a grounding in this space and make impact, it really took some time. So as we think about the toolbox, let's look at it in terms of whatever we want to take, whatever we want to inform in terms of development or adaptation of PSS-SEL materials. In your organization, country, or context, have you explored the local needs? Have you gathered local input? Have you highlighted and prioritized local perspectives? And have you used data and resources? So as we explore, next slide, how can you use the localizing tools? First, identify the needs through focus groups with local stakeholders. All these different people we have talked about, the government agencies, the parents, the students themselves, the teachers, the program managers or the project managers, be able to get them to be able to come into focus groups for you to be able to identify the needs. Then from there, learn about key skills which are in the toolbox. Then having learned about the key skills, look at what do I need to prioritize for my context, and then how do I validate materials for my local communities. I'll keep saying this, our tools are flexible, so you use them based on your needs, objectives, and resources. They can be used as a standalone on their own or sequenced, and you can include guides to make information actionable in your setting as well. So next slide. You need to identify the local needs. I think that's a first step. And this is a four-step process, including a comprehensive bank of questions. And I'm sure Brian will be able to take us through the toolbox to see this for identifying PSS and SEL skills, which are most important in your settings, because we need to look at, are they relevant? Are they valuable? And do they have developmental progression of social emotional skills? And this can vary from cultures and even from contexts. As I talk about the cultures and the context, what is relevant even in Nairobi, let me talk about Kenya itself, may be very different from what is needed in Kakuma or what is even needed in another region in Kenya. So existing resources may not include the skills and support that are important in your context. So it is important to determine what is local and relevant for your work to be effective. Next slide, please. After that, I think these are questions that Brian will help us through. Let's go to the next slide. We shall look at it in the toolbox. We look at how do we identify local needs, engage with stakeholders in the community, with children, with the adolescents to identify local needs, values, and priorities, identify goals and outcomes of PSS-SEL programs. You always need to begin with the end in mind. That way you're able to find a sense of direction even as you're identifying local needs. And then ensure that terms used in your PSS-SEL materials are culturally relevant. We could be talking about one thing, but how you put it out may or may not make it culturally relevant. So kindly ensure that you could be talking about self-awareness, but how is it culturally accepted in the term that you will use in your local context? Let's go to the next slide. After that, identify needs and assets for your local context. Which themes or sub-themes would be most important so that you begin to consider this as you're using the toolbox in exploring in your settings, and why are they important? You know, are there specific stakeholder groups that you might consider including in the process more than others, and which ones and why? Kindly use the questions in the toolbox to help you reflect so that you examine assumptions and come up with factual information. They help you to plan so that you select questions to gather information. They help you to engage and have meaningful conversations. And then you're able to synthesize and apply learning to your work to make it effective, but for us to also keep enhancing what we're doing in terms of PSS-SEL. After that, learn about the skills. We have a part in the toolbox where we have an inventory of 24 concrete SEL skills and 30 dimensions in terms of well-being that support positive outcomes for children and youth. The field of PSS-SEL has many types of things you need to consider. And this tool helps stakeholders understand the specific concepts, often referred to as social emotional learning or PSS and PSS. And they help you to reflect on what that might look like in your local context. So please use the learn about skills for you to be able to say, I could be talking about self-awareness, but in my local context, this is what it is termed at, or a different framework calls it a different thing. So please take time to go through the learn about skills as well. Next slide. Consider the following as you learn about skills. When looking at the inventory of skills, are there competencies listed here that you know by other names, like I've mentioned? Are there competencies listed here that are new for you or surprising to you? I think we need to continuously keep learning and growing as we keep enhancing our work in PSS-SEL. And then when looking at the inventory of contextual factors that affect well-being, which contextual factors are important for you to consider and prioritize for your work? So please consider these reflective questions as you learn about the skills. And then having learned about the skills, how do you learn about the skills, become familiar with them, deepen your knowledge? Because in the toolbox, we have global research, we have programs, we have curricula, and we have measurement tools. And we've also linked this to the measurement tools for INEE and the measurement library, and then consider how these concepts appear in your local setting, and also look at what might be missing. As we continue to use this toolbox, we are also learning that there are things we may need to enhance and add into the toolbox that people who have used our toolbox give us feedback on. So please note the toolbox might be missing a tool or so, but we are open to receiving feedback and looking at what might be missing so that we keep enhancing the toolbox. After learning about the skills, the next step, we use the data. And this is a brief walkthrough of each data tool and suggestions of how to address specific interests, needs, or questions about PSS-SEL frameworks currently being used in the EIE settings. The data tools help you to explore information from 70 different frameworks and materials that are currently in use. So you have a wide variety of frameworks to borrow from to enhance your work or to create something new for your local context. Given the large number of frameworks and terms included in the materials, the data tools are critical for you to understand the different concepts, how they appear, and how we define them through the field. So next slide. How do we learn about the skills? We gain a deep understanding of SEL skills and features of well-being, and then we learn how to do things like comparing different frameworks. I'm sure Brian will help us to see how do you compare the different frameworks in the toolbox and the different terms so that you're able to gain a better understanding and to help you focus on specific frameworks that meet the need of your local context. You will also find patterns among frameworks used in specific regions or with certain age groups, and you're able to search for skills that are aligned with your work. So please note the frameworks. As you compare them, you can be able to form patterns in terms of the regions. You can also be able to form patterns in terms of age groups, and you're also able to search for skills that are aligned with your work. As we go to the next slide, something I've come to realize even as I have these conversations with different people from different regions, what my teenage son wants is not so different from what another teenager wants in a different continent or a different region. It is just that it may look a bit different, but at the core, there's a common theme in terms of the age group they're in. So how do we learn about the skills? We compare frameworks. This is in summary. Identify focus of the frameworks, find patterns among the frameworks, and then search for skills that are aligned with your work. And so that is how you get to learn about the skills in the toolbox. Next slide. And then after learning about the skills, we have two more steps, which is prioritizing for local context, which is, and then validating, but for now, let's look at prioritizing. And prioritizing for local context is a two-part exercise that helps you reflect on the local needs and the key documents, and then you're able to align and refer terms, and definitions for use in your context and determine the next steps in your work. Why do we prioritize for local context? Because each context is unique in terms of the needs that shape how PSS-SEL concepts are prioritized. We consider local needs to ensure that your work is aligned with your setting. And we also look at relevant terms and definitions in your field. This also promotes greater transparency and cohesion between PSS-SEL approaches while maintaining an important local variation across the field of EIA. How do you consider prioritizing? Use the tool guides. The user will use the tool guides through a prioritization process that incorporates learnings from many of the other localizing tools or different areas. And then you are also able to read through and reflect and plan steps using the prioritizing tools that are there in your areas of work or specific projects that could benefit as you look at how do I prioritize for my local context. Next slide. How do we do this? Align with the needs of your settings. We cannot keep overemphasizing. You need to be clearly and to a good level grounded on the needs of your local setting. Know the relevant skills and concepts, the relevant frameworks, and then incorporate all the other resources that are in the INEE website and in the toolbox to inform your PSS-SEL work. And then as you do this, refine the definitions in terms of the concepts in your setting, organize them to guide your work. Take time to just be able to look at the basis of the different frameworks, curriculum, and other resources so that as you proceed to go out and implement your PSS-SEL work, you have clearly planned your work. Failing to plan is planning to fail. So we are very intentional in the toolbox to give you time to plan your work. And when you're able to plan your work, the implementation phase becomes easier as you prioritize for your local context. Next slide. So this is how you prioritize, set your needs, look at the relevant skills and concepts, look at other literature, look at the existing frameworks, and align these 4 key components to be able to prioritize for your local context. I think that's a summary of prioritizing for your local context. And then after this, we validate for local context. And these are a set of activities to examine the relevance and the fit of these PSS materials, SEL materials, in your local setting. You're able to also use this to gather feedback from key community members as you keep implementing your PSS-SEL work. Many resources are developed with specific outcomes, context, or population in mind. And so we are saying these materials developed in one context may not be relevant for a different context with different needs. So you need to take time to plan how to gather feedback, to ensure usability, to ensure cultural relevance, to ensure uptake, and more importantly, sustainability of what we are going to do in terms of the work that we are rolling out. So how do we do this? Consider the following. Read through the overview of validation with this information in mind. And as you're reading this, think of the components of your work. What materials do you need? What training toolkits do you need to develop? Which other resources do you need to gather together before you roll out, and that could benefit from validation. You could also do this by engaging in a validation process that will be beneficial for these components of your work when you roll out your PSS or SEL work. Next slide. How do you validate, plan, and carry out activities that engage local community members in giving feedback? And then identify who should be involved. What feedback do you want to gather from them that will be useful? And what questions or content do stakeholders need for us to be able to address what we need to do in terms of validating for our local context? So how do you validate in summary? Look at who should be involved, look at how will you gather useful feedback, and then what questions or content should be relevant, should reviewers address. In validation, this is where you determine the degree of agreement between the materials you're gathering and how relevant they are with your context. And I think that is a summary. So this is an inventory of the SEL skills and competencies in the toolbox. We have put them in 6 major categories: the cognitive, the emotion, the social, the values, the perspectives, and the identity. And so if you want to look at the different skills and competencies, you should be able to find this within the toolbox under the different categories that we have placed them in. Other than that, next slide. We have the features of well-being, and these are quite varied, and you need to consider as you're localizing. You need to consider the ecological factors. You need to look at the equity features. You need to look at PSS and SEL in terms of health, safety, and even the adult support, because children don't exist in a vacuum. They heavily rely on adult support and other caregivers, such as teachers, parents, or other caregivers to support their well-being in general. So we also have an inventory of different factors or different features you need to consider in terms of well-being as you consider PSS and SEL in your work. Next slide. And so how can the tools be used? In summary, identify the local needs, learn about skills, use the data, prioritize for local context, and then validate for local context. This is the cycle of how you can use the toolbox if you want to use it in totality. Remember, we said you can use one part of the toolbox as a standalone, or you can use the entire toolbox in your contextualization process. And so this slide just gives us a concrete summary of step-by-step what we need to do. Having said that, next slide. I will now invite Brian to introduce himself and then to take us through a practical experience inside the toolbox. Brian?
Thank you, Esther. I'm Brian Nelson with the EASL Lab at the Harvard Graduate School of Education, and I'm going to walk through a little bit of what we've just seen, plus a little bit more in the PSS-SEL toolbox.
Feel free to type your questions or reflections as Brian takes us through the toolbox.
Thank you. So I'll walk us through some of the features of the toolbox. We won't have time to view every feature of every tool, but I'll show some of the ways that these tools can be used. And I'll do this walking through a couple user scenarios. So we'll first walk through the data tools, which can help you explore different existing PSS and SEL approaches that are being used in over 50 countries already. So in this first scenario, I will be a user who wants to better understand the skills and contextual factors that affect well-being, with an emphasis on critical thinking in the Middle East and North Africa region. And so we can use the data tools to explore existing frameworks and the skills and definitions in them. So the first thing I might want to do is to see which frameworks emphasize critical thinking. So I can use this compare domains tool. And what this tool is doing is it's showing what percentage of each of these 6 domains of SEL that the skills within that framework are emphasizing. And those 6 domains are the cognitive, emotion, social, values, perspectives, and identity. So these line up with the inventory of skills that Esther showed previously. Since critical thinking is in the cognitive domain, I can start by sorting by the cognitive domain. And here you'll see that the skills and competencies in the frameworks within the toolbox include skills related to the cognitive domain, anywhere between 0 and 50% of that framework. So for example, this top row, we see the learning through play framework. About 50% of the skills in that framework are related to the cognitive domain. From here, we can see how much each subdomain contributes to this percentage. So I'll show the subdomains. And because I'm interested in critical thinking, as I mentioned, I'll sort by critical thinking. And so now we can see which of the frameworks that contain cognitive skills, what percent of those cognitive skills are coming from each of these subdomains, sorted by critical thinking. So these frameworks towards the top might be of interest to me if I'm interested in diving more into how different frameworks are defining and organizing skills around critical thinking. So from there, I can dig into any one of these frameworks in particular. Now, we can also use the compare frameworks tool to directly compare 2 frameworks. So this tool allows us to see where frameworks include similar skills, even when they're called different names. In this visual, you can select any framework on the left and any framework on the right and see where their skills are related to one another. In the previous tool, I saw that the UNICEF India framework included critical thinking. So I can select that. And we might want to know how that compares to skills in another framework. So if I select a second framework here, what this is doing is it's showing us where there's overlap and how these skills are being defined. So we can see that the critical thinking in UNICEF India is related to 3 skills in the skills for health framework, being negotiation and refusal skills, cooperation and teamwork, and advocacy skills. So this may indicate that there's elements of these 3 skills that are related to critical thinking, and then I could click on any one of those to investigate further. Another tool we could use to look into this question of where critical thinking is appearing across frameworks is this compare terms tool. What it's doing is it's showing where a particular skill appears across all of the frameworks. Again, I'm interested in critical thinking. I'm going to select that on the left, and that's going to highlight which skills across these frameworks include elements of critical thinking. Now, this is a lot of frameworks, so maybe we might want to narrow it down. So I mentioned I was interested in the Middle East and North Africa region, so I can use the filters to narrow that down a bit. So I'm going to say region of use. I'll select the MENA region. Now I'm seeing the frameworks that are used in that region. So this brings it down to a smaller, more manageable set of frameworks to see where critical thinking is appearing. These filters can be used across almost all of the data tools across the site to help us dive down into a particular subset of frameworks. Now, I can hover over these to see what is the relevant framework. Here it's reimagining life skills and citizenship education. And then I can see that in this framework, critical thinking, skills related to critical thinking include creativity, critical thinking, and problem solving, to name a few. And each of these can be clicked on to look at how that framework is defining and using that skill. But what about some of the contextual factors that affect well-being? So I can navigate to the compare well-being tool, and you'll see that the filter here remains. So I'm still looking at region of use, Middle East and North Africa. So I might be interested in additional critical thinking. I might be interested in knowing which frameworks are addressing equity within this region. So here you'll see 5 contextual factors that affect well-being: ecology, equity, health, safety, and adult support. And I can click on equity, and this is going to sort these based on how much these frameworks are addressing this contextual factor. In this case, the foundational guidance adolescent kit for expression and innovation is at the top as mentioning equity the most within this. So this might be something I want to look into in more detail. To see in what ways this resource includes equity, I can include more detail by increasing the level of detail. So I'll add another level here, and now I can see within this resource, when it's addressing equity, it's addressing things like emergency, development, education access. So giving us a little bit deeper picture of what areas of equity are being addressed. And the last tool I will walk through here is the thesaurus. So as you would imagine, this is just a set of all of the terms across all of the frameworks and documents in the toolbox. And then like a thesaurus, we can see how they're related to one another. So I can search for a particular term. So I'm going to search for critical thinking. And this will show me all the frameworks that include critical thinking as the name of a skill. If I choose one, I can see how that framework defines critical thinking. And this page shows how the skill is defined by this framework, the Kenya Values and Life Skills Framework. We can see which skills in other frameworks are related to this based on how they're defined. So like with the thesaurus, this is looking at the definition. It's not looking at the name of the term. And we can also see which other frameworks includes the term critical thinking. So all of these here on the right under also defined in includes critical thinking as a term, and we can click into that to see how that framework is defining and using critical thinking. Or we can view all those definitions at once if we want to compare across all of the frameworks that include critical thinking. How are they defining it? And this can help us understand how this might look similar or different across different settings. So that's a quick run through of the data tools. I'll now look a little bit more into the localizing tools. the second section here on the home page. And in this scenario, I will, again, not be able to walk through every single feature of each of these, but I'll walk through a few examples to show how they could be used. In this scenario, I will be a user that wants to create a framework to guide my work in a setting that does not yet have a contextualized framework. These tools can be used a lot of different ways, but this is just one example of how that might look. So as we saw previously, there's 5 localizing tools. The first one is identify local needs and assets. We can get a brief overview of what is in the tool, a video to walk through the tool. If you'd like to go through that and see another walkthrough of the tool, or we can just download the tool. Now, this tool can be used to identify the PSS-SEL needs and assets in a given context. As was mentioned already, there is a contextualization process. You could use all of these tools as a part of one larger contextualization process, or you might be interested in using 1 or 2 of these tools that fit the phase that your work is currently in. So this tool includes steps for reflecting on objectives, planning for gathering information from the community, engaging with local stakeholders, and synthesizing what I learned from this. There are templates throughout to help me with each of these steps. For example, I was going to show you the question sets that was mentioned. So in this scenario, I'm planning to engage with stakeholders, and I want to know which questions can help me with this. So including this tool, I think one of the great parts of this tool is a question bank that can help you come up with those questions that you want to use when engaging with stakeholders. These are broken into different categories, things like children and youth's learning goals, learning contexts and practices, social and cultural values, roles, assets, and norms. And within each of these sections, there's a set of questions that I can use. So from this list, I can select what I need to better understand the needs and goals of the community that I'm working in. So I might be interested in, what does it mean for a child or youth to be successful in your setting? Or how do you know when children and youth are learning effectively, and what does it look like? The answers to these questions will help me better understand what I might need to include in a localized framework. Once I have identified the local needs, I can learn more about what the research is saying about these skills in the Learn About Skills tool. The Learn About Skills tool provides a brief summary of the research on PSS-SEL, along with concrete descriptions of 24 skills and 30 contextual factors that are linked to positive outcomes for children and youth. This is the inventory that Esther was speaking about. So I can open this tool and I can scroll down to that inventory. So in addition to the skills that were identified by local stakeholders, I can use this tool to identify some of the skills and competencies linked to child outcomes. In this table here, I can see the skills, related names, and a description of each of them. And after identifying relevant skills for my context, I can use the reflection guide for synthesizing my thoughts on what could be included in a framework and why. So this tool can be used for learning about both skills and contextual factors that affect well-being. And so this is just another source of information for me as I'm developing my framework. The third localizing tool is to use the data tools. This provides an overview of the data view tools that we just reviewed previously. During this step, I may want to learn more about existing frameworks to better understand how skills are defined across different contexts. And then I could pull in skills and definitions from other frameworks that were developed in or used in my context, so another source that I'm going to be pulling from. I won't walk through this in too much detail because we've already walked through the data tools, but this just gives you more information on how to use some of those data tools that I previously walked through. The next tool is the prioritize for local context. And this can help me reflect on the local PSS-SEL priorities, organize and define key concepts in alignment with local objectives, and to plan for next steps in the setting. So once I have identified skills from local stakeholders, from the inventory of skills, and from existing frameworks, I can use this tool to find alignment between those different sources. I can identify areas that overlap or similarity. I can identify gaps in what I have found so far. And I can take these to further create concrete, clear, developmental and contextual definitions for the relevant skills or features of well-being. These can be used to engage with stakeholders, to map skills, and I can synthesize the themes and observations found from stakeholder engagement. And lastly, the validate for local context tool. Once the skills for my framework that I'm working on have been identified, mapped, and synthesized, it's then important to validate the framework. The validate for local context tool can be used to plan and carry out a set of activities that engage local community members in providing feedback on the relevance and fit of PSS-SEL materials. With this tool, I can reflect on what is needed for the validation process. I can plan to collect stakeholder feedback, engage with stakeholders, and then synthesize this learning into recommendations and revisions to my newly created framework. So in this example, for validating my framework, I can plan to engage local stakeholders, such as teachers, and this tool can help me plan that validation workshop. And then ultimately, this feedback can help me revise my localized framework. So most of these localizing tools have a lot more uses than just developing a localized framework. That was just one example I was using to walk through them. They include many more templates and useful items within them that I encourage you to explore on your own. We just didn't have time to walk through all of those. But the last thing I want to point out is the additional resources that are available on the site. So this third category here on the homepage includes ways to use the toolbox. So this might be something like a decision tree for identifying which of the localizing tools I want to use depending on my situation. It might include user pathways, which demonstrates how various stakeholders can use the toolbox to create, adopt or adapt a framework, or to localize a PSS-SEL program, or to find and select measures to assess PSS and SEL, or others. So again, there's lots of different ways one could use these localizing tools. And this just gives some examples of what some of those different pathways might look like, how you might organize workshops around that, and more. There's also a framework fit checklist as a resource for identifying whether or not an existing framework might meet your needs. And another great part of this website are the case studies that are available. So there are both video and written case studies for learning how the toolbox has been used in other contexts. And there are additional collections of resources around PSS-SEL and EIE, gender and inclusive well-being, teacher well-being, and more. So there's a lot to explore here. I wish I could have spent a lot more time walking through every part of this website, but this gives you a little bit of overview. I really encourage you to explore more on your own of what can be found in the toolbox. And from here, I can hand it back to Esther.
Thank you, Brian, for that orientation walkthrough of the toolbox. Just to confirm, the There was a question here. How many of these frameworks listed are open access or open source?
That's a great question. I think I would say most of them are, you can find publicly available online or through organizations. There may have been a few that when we were collecting frameworks and documents that may have been directly sent to us that you might not be able to find directly, but you might be able to reach out to the organizations that develop those for more information.
Okay. Thank you for that response. Any question for us concerning the toolbox and you making use of this resource for your work? Please feel free to unmute yourself or to type in the chat box.
Yeah, I guess since I was the one that asked that question there on kind of open source frameworks and so forth, I remember at one point being supporting a project that was in, I think, East Africa, and we were looking for locally like established frameworks that were in that particular country. I forget exactly which one, maybe maybe DRC it was. So we used that tool to try to see what we could find locally and then kind of reached out to, to some of those different partners. It was tough in that case, to find ones that were sort of both, locally developed and, that the organizations would respond to us. But I think in a sense, like what would be your guidance or what you would recommend in terms of how hard do you kind of look for something already existing and try to build on what's already there as opposed to kind of just go from, square one and kind of go through the whole process that you outlined and really come up with something that's local for that specific context? What's the best balance in your opinion?
Yeah, and I think a lot of that's going to depend on just the organization's resources and ability to create a framework. I think you've noted something. There in many areas of the world, there is a shortage of locally developed frameworks. And that's what we're really hoping this tool can help people do, is create more locally created frameworks. We've worked with, in many places around the world in creating those locally developed frameworks. And as you can imagine, it is a pretty large undertaking to go through each of these tools in depth. But you do come out with something that is going to be more responsive to the needs of the local community. And so that's always something we want to do, but we also realize that is a large undertaking. And so there might be ways to take frameworks that were, as you notice, the filters here, we can filter for where a framework was developed and where it's been used. So we want to do, aim for using a framework that's been developed in the region that you're working in. But you could also look at frameworks that have been used in that region and see how they've been used and how that went. So it's going to depend on your resources and your ability. But we love locally developed frameworks because that is going to be the most responsive to the community.
Thank you for that question. The person who asked is saying, thanks, Brian. I should have started with the fact that I really love and appreciate this tool and have used it quite a lot. Good feedback to hear that. Thank you.
We love hearing that. Yes.
Yes. There was a question, but it was responded to. I don't know if you want to add on to it. Is there an existing network or organization in Pakistan or neighboring countries focused on promoting PSS-SEL research and practice?
That is a great question. I don't have an answer for that. So I think what Lauren said is a great place to start.
Yeah. But you could look at the MENA region and be able to see what is currently in the greater region.
If looking for frameworks, yeah, you could do that.
Yeah, if looking for frameworks, yes. Okay, Sarah, you could look for frameworks in that region and see what is currently in use there. Any other question? One more. Okay. Regarding taxonomy. Maybe Sarah, you can type more or unmute yourself and ask your question. Okay. She says, yeah, okay, respond to it, Brian.
I think this question may be related to a lot of the development, the data tools here are based on our previous work on Explore SEL. So the data tools will look very similar. It is a slightly different set of frameworks. So that may be what you're seeing, whereas the Explore SEL website might have a different set of frameworks, although there's a lot of overlap. This one is more focused in EIE. That is where a lot of the frameworks are coming from for this particular project. So I think that's what the question is, because I don't think this site in particular has had anything added or removed.
Okay. Any opportunities or partnership in Afghanistan for local NGOs?
Is this generally looking for opportunities for partnership?
I may not understand this, but maybe just to give a general scope, we've had organizations use the toolbox to come up with localized frameworks. And so they're able to reach out to us and we're able to support them through the use of the toolbox, and they come up with their own framework or borrow from a framework that is there. I don't know if that is what you mean. And maybe they could clarify if that's what they were asking. Yes, in framework. Okay. So I think I have responded. And yes, that one is located on Explore SEL. Okay, thank you. One last question before we take a break. I know this has been a very heavy part of the workshop. We want to come back and introduce one more resource and then we can wrap up for today. Yes, please study it some more. If you have any questions regarding the toolbox or any resources, please always know you can reach out to me. And I can be able to set up a meeting or respond to you on email. But always, please know you can reach out to my desk or anyone else at INEE, and they'll be able to direct you to myself or anyone else, and we can guide you through using our resources in an efficient and localized manner. So we'll give you the email address at the end of this, and even with any communication coming to you after this workshop, so that you can be able to continue to use our resources. So with that, we will take a 5-minute break, and then we will come back for the last bit of our workshop. Thank you for being here.
And please do come back after the break. We'll be talking about teacher well-being. All right, folks, I hope you're all back from the break, feeling rested and caffeinated. Can I get a thumbs up or a hands up to show that you guys are back? Yep. Thank you. All right, guys. So, we have talked quite a lot about what it means to be well as a learner, the physical and psychological and social elements that go into being well, how we can support the well-being of learners. Now we're going to shift a little bit to talk about teacher well-being. But before we jump into some of those challenges or good practice ideas, I'd like to ask you first, why does teacher well-being matter? Why do you think it matters that teachers are well, that they feel capable, that they feel confident? Feel free to unmute yourself or type your answers in the chat. Why does teacher well-being matter? And we're not going to move on until somebody says something. Yep, to do your job well. Great. Why else? No, we're feeling shy. All right. All right, so teacher well-being matters for a number of reasons. First of all, in order, it does reflect on their students, very good. First of all, in order for teachers to support their learners' well-being, they first need to be well themselves. Teachers that have the tools to support their own well-being are more able to pass those tools on to their learners, impacting their well-being. It's also important to acknowledge that teachers aren't just tools for education. They're also people who are often experiencing the same challenges as their learners, and we have a responsibility to ensure that we're supporting them as well, that we're supporting their well-being as well. So, what affects teacher well-being in your context? Um, Type your answer in the chat. What are some things that affect teacher well-being? What are some things that might make teachers feel stressed or uneasy or lack confidence? For example, when I was a teacher, something that affected my well-being was sudden curriculum changes. So it was really, really stressful when the content we were supposed to teach or the way we were supposed to teach it changed suddenly, but we weren't given any advice on how to do that practically. Um, what are some things that are challenging for teachers? Security and safety, salary, absolutely. Can I get one more example, folks? Some other things that affect teacher well-being. Language and culture, that's a super important point. In many places, the language of instruction may not be a language that teachers speak super well. Working conditions, yep, especially for female teachers, there may be very real safety concerns. Some excellent examples, guys. So before we go there, so we know that teaching is a really stressful profession, especially in environments where teachers are expected to create safe and inclusive classrooms and promote cognitive growth and well-being for their students and teach social and emotional learning and do all of these wonderful things, but in contexts where they're provided with very, very little support and very few resources. This stress is often amplified in crisis and conflict affected contexts where teachers are often working without professional development support, without certification, and often without stable compensation. In 2021, INEE surveyed over 1,000 teachers in emergency contexts, and the things that they found the most stressful were some of the things that you've raised today. So, low pay, limited teaching resources, and difficult student behavior. So I'll pass over now to Esther to talk through the conceptual framework for teacher well-being.
Thank you, Lauren, for that introduction. I think for me, teacher well-being is one of the key things we need to contextualize and always consider, even as we roll out other interventions for the learner, because a teacher cannot give what they do not have. So they cannot ensure the well-being of the learner if they're not being taken care of. And so the conceptual framework talks about the teacher well-being in low resource, crisis, and conflict affected contexts at different levels. We need to look at it at an individual level. This is the teacher in terms of their gender, their displacement status, their level of education, their coping mechanisms, are they healthy or unhealthy? Currently, what's their employment status? What's their teaching experience? Do they have knowledge in terms of the content? And are they also culturally competent? So that is the key first level you need to look at in terms of teacher well-being. Before you look at them in totality, this teacher that is in front of you, when you look at these factors, have you taken care of their well-being, and are you employing any protective factors when you consider these things for them to continue to remain effective and to even support well-being of their learners? We also need to look at teacher well-being constructs in terms of teacher self-efficacy, job stress and burnout, job satisfaction, as well as their social emotional competence. You cannot ask a teacher to teach self-awareness or emotional regulation if they themselves have not been able to internalize that for themselves. Other than that, you need to look at the teacher well-being in terms of the school context, and this you look at in terms of their peer relationships with other teachers, teacher-student relationships, how are they relating with the school leadership, and also more importantly, what are the school resources that are there to ensure that the teacher is able to deliver what they're supposed to do, especially in this conflict-affected context. Even with the limited resources, if we're able to support this teacher and their well-being, they're still able to show up and be able to give support and be able to be there for the student, because we have come to learn that education is one of the key interventions when it comes to responding in a crisis. We actually know that education is life-saving in an emergency or a crisis context. So having looked at a teacher in terms of their individual and context level, you need to look at the community in terms of, are they able to access their own basic needs? Is there respect and recognition? And is there a sense of responsibility and duty that the community can be able to instill and be able to make this teacher feel, so that they're able to employ their duty in a well-being and in an effective manner? After the community level, we now need to look at it in terms of the national, contextual, regional, as well as the global level. And this is why we look at policy issues and the policy environment. How is the teacher management nationally or regionally? Is there a right to work? How is their compensation being handled? Is there teacher professional development? And is there certification and recognition when it comes to these three key levels? When we look at all these factors, then the risk factors of teacher well-being decrease as the protective factors of teacher well-being does increase. Please note, we are going to look at this conceptual framework under the basis of the INEE minimum standards. Please look out on our website for the different INEE minimum standards orientation workshops for you to be able to understand, because we have just relaunched the 2024 INEE minimum standards, so that you're able to align all these different levels and be able to provide guidance for understanding and applying this conceptual framework with the basic standards we are saying when it comes to offering education in the emergency and crisis context. I hope this gives you a better understanding of the conceptual framework, even as you look at teacher well-being. Back to you, Lauren.
Thanks, Esther. All right, so with all of these challenges and these needs and different ways of looking at teacher well-being in mind, The INEE PSS-SEL working group, in collaboration with the Teachers in Crisis Contexts, or TIC working group, have developed several resources on supporting teacher well-being. These are a few of them. Can I get a hand raised or a thumb up if any of these look familiar to you? Even if they're not, I'm going to talk about them anyway. All right, so the first resource is the Teacher Wellbeing Tools and Resources Mapping. This resource maps the existing body of work on teacher wellbeing and presents a curated list of resources, tools, and policy or advocacy documents that address teacher wellbeing in emergency settings. It also includes an analysis of resource gaps and a set of 13 key recommendations. Next up, we have the Teacher Wellbeing Guidance Note, which provides advice on how to support teacher wellbeing in the 5 domains of the INEE minimum standards. It explains how to promote mental health and psychosocial support, or MHPSS, for teachers, create more enabling work environments for teachers, and enhance teacher voice, agency, and leadership in crises. It also offers resources and tools and examples of those standards in action. And as you can see over there, the guidance note has been contextualized for Colombia, Kakuma refugee camp in Kenya, and for non-state online universities in Myanmar and Palestine. There is also a facilitations pack, which supports the delivery of a workshop to define and contextualize teacher wellbeing policy and practice. And that includes a facilitation guide, workshop outline, slide deck, and participant workbooks. And it's not up there at the moment, but we do also have a podcast that has 2 episodes. One, well, has 20 episodes, but 2 episodes that are focused on mental health and psychosocial support, and another one on teachers. So if you're interested in hearing from mental health practitioners and from teachers themselves on some key points around teacher well-being, have a listen there. The links to all of these resources are in the chat. I would highly recommend that you take a look. Moving right along, so these are some of the guiding principles in the guidance note, the 3 underlying principles to teacher well-being. Principle 1 on promoting teachers' access to MHPSS. When teachers are supported and better able to manage their mental health and well-being, they're more likely to create positive learning environments through the prevention and self-management of factors leading to stress and burnout. And teachers with mental health conditions or psychosocial challenges really need MHPSS services that fit their circumstances and help them better understand their current needs and help them develop positive coping mechanisms. Principle 2 around creating enabling work environments for teachers. That can look like providing quality teacher professional development, nurturing strong social networks for teachers, providing safe transport routes to school, clear codes of conduct and referral pathways for gender-based violence, and well-ventilated and properly resourced classrooms, among many, many other ideas. The last point around principle 3, so enhancing teacher voice, agency, and leadership. This principle is around making sure that teachers have a say in decisions that affect them and their learners. So, for example, providing opportunities for formal and informal teacher leadership as coaches or mentors or teacher representatives on community and school governance boards. So with all that in mind, we're going to go back to the Jamboard for one last time. I'm going to put that Jamboard in the chat again. Going to go back to the Jamboard to page 4 of the Jamboard. Again, you can navigate between the Jamboards using these arrows at the top. And we're going to brainstorm a few different examples of how different education stakeholders can support teacher well-being. So how can parents and caregivers, teachers themselves, school leaders, policymakers, or donors support teacher well-being, whether that is around providing mental health support or creating an enabling work environment. Feel free to add some sticky notes with ideas of how you think the different education stakeholders can support well-being. We have 4 minutes. Four minutes to come up with some examples. Ready, go. Peer support, awesome. Seeing some great examples. You have 2 minutes left. All right. We have some great examples here around parents and caregivers, maybe parent-teacher associations, maybe inviting parents and caregivers to provide support in classrooms on a voluntary basis. For teachers, peer support, peer learning circles, maybe opportunities to learn from each other and create community. For school leaders, lots of really good examples here. Community of practice, setting up communities of practice and social systems, making sure there's continuing education, creating a follow-up system. For policymakers, again, that piece on teacher voice, so making sure teachers are involved in decision making. And then for donors, making sure that there's funding for teacher training, for teacher well-being initiatives. All right, I think that is all from me, but I will hand back over to Esther for the Q&A or for any additional thoughts.
Thank you, Lauren, for introducing us to teacher well-being. I think let me say again, we can't ask teachers to give that which they don't have. So we need to take care of them because they continue to be with the learners for years and for hours beyond what we normally do. So we have introduced you to our resources and we have looked at the concept, the localizing bit of it. Anyone with any question as we come to the end of this orientation workshop or feedback? Bente, you're on mute if you are speaking.
Oh, no, I'm not on mute. Hi, everyone. And thank you for staying on. I saw there was a question regarding the new INEE. I suppose it is the new INEE minimum standard you are asking about. There are a minimum standard orientation that are in development and will be piloted for different organizations and members. In addition to that, maybe in the future there will be planned for training of trainers. Not that is not actually on the agenda so far, but all the material that will be developed will be on the website, and you will be able to download it and use it. But we will recommend, if you download material, and I think that is for all material you want to use, it is smart to get in touch with us if you have any questions regarding facilitation, ways of delivering, what you should think about to change maybe objectives to kind of fit with the context you are working in. So I hope that's okay for you, Lauren and Esther.
Thank you, Bente, for that. I see Alhaji's hand has been raised. Alhaji, you're free to unmute yourself. Thank you, Bente, for responding to that. Alhaji? Okay. As we wait for Alhaji,
Hello, good evening. Yeah,
okay.
hello, good evening. Hello.
Good evening to you.
Sorry, you're on mute again.
Yeah. Okay.
Maybe if you're having difficulty with your microphone, you could write your question in the chat.
Okay. Anyone with any other question as we wait for Alhaji? And as we come to the end, I invite us to type maybe what is one key takeaway for you from this workshop, or what is one thing that has stood out for you even as we shared this today. Thank you, Azaki. Good presentation. Anyone wants to share anything else? Facilitation of how to use the toolbox. Thank you for that feedback. Thank you. Good workshop. Thank you. If you have any questions on INEE's gender initiatives, please reach out to Lauren. She has great resources when it comes to gender. She has a lot of information when it comes to gender. Please reach out to her at any point. Thank you for staying. Ozgenur from Turkey, thank you so much. If you have any other question also regarding PSS-SEL, feel free to reach out to me on the email I'm typing now. I have greater confidence to utilize the sea of resources relevant to my context. Thank you for that feedback. Please know you can reach out if you need any further support.
Right, I'm
Thanks,
going to stop
Madam
the recording.
Lauren. Yeah, thanks, Madam Lauren, for the link. Excellent presentation. Have learned that in as much as we have to take care of students, teachers are the ladders. They have to climb to transcending this changing landscape in education.
That's such a beautiful way of saying that.